In this example, I want to use Lambda to delete a record from DynamoDB. Okay, so in the last video, we looked at how we'd insert data into Dynamo. We inserted a couple of records, and what I want to do now is I want to correspondingly delete those records with code. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function called deleteDynamo. Okay, so NodeJS is fine. Okay, a couple of things. I want to clean this up, so I don't want their hello world code. I want to import a couple of libraries. So I want to import the deleteItem command and the client. So I want to import the dynamoDB client. And those are both from the AWS SDK. And then client dynamoDB. And then I also want to import the marshal and unmarshal. I always put spaces there in front. Marshal and unmarshal from the AWS SDK. And then it's going to be util-dynamodb. Okay, so I have those imports. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate a DynamoDB client. So here's my Dynamo client. And again, I'm going to specify the region because our DynamoDB table is located in US East 2. Okay, and then I have to specify some params. So if I'm going to do a delete, the params that I need is what table am I deleting from? And then what record am I deleting? Okay, and that record that I'm deleting is going to be defined by the key. So the params are going to be fairly straightforward. I'm going to specify a table name. Okay, so the table name is going to be baseball stats. And then the key that I want is going to be some JSON object where I specify the team ID and the sort key. So the team ID in this case will be player info underscore MLK. We inserted two Brewer player records, so we inserted Robin Yount and Prince Fielder. Okay, so those are the records that we just inserted. So if I go back over to DynamoDB, it was these two records right here that I have highlighted. So player info underscore MLK for both of the team IDs, and then 1 and 19 for Robin Yount and Prince Fielder. So those are the two records that I want to delete in this example. Okay, so the team ID is going to be player info underscore MLK for Milwaukee, and then the sort key is going to be 1, in this case for Prince Fielder. Okay, so those are the parameters that I need. And then once we get those parameters defined about what record we actually want to delete, now we can get into our try-catch block. So I want to try to execute my delete statement, but if it doesn't work, I want to do a console.error of the exception. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to use our DynamoDB client to send a command. And the command that we want to send is a new deleteItem command with our parameters. Okay, and we're going to want confirmation of that, so we're going to get some data back. And in order to get the data back, since this is an asynchronous method call, we have to wait for that delete to actually occur. And then once it does, we can then return the data. Okay, and that's how I want to handle that. Okay, and we know that our Lambda code right now is going to interact with DynamoDB. So our Lambda code that is executing with a specific IAM role is going to need permission to do this. So I'm going to go over to the configuration. I'm going to go to the permissions. I'm going to the role that's associated with this Lambda function. And I'm going to give it the DynamoDB full access policy. Okay, so I'm adding that permission. Okay, and then I'm going to go back over to my code. And I don't think I've actually deployed the changes, so I'm going to deploy the changes. Okay, and if I go ahead and test this, the idea is right now, if I look at dynamoDB, I have 38 records. After the delete, I should have 37 records. So Prince Fielder is going to be the first one to go, and then Robin Yount would be the second one to go. So if I test this right now, I have to configure my test event. So the first time through, I'm just going to have an empty event argument. I'm going to call this my dynamo delete test. Okay, so I have that test event created, and I'm going to go ahead and test this out. And you'll see I get an issue here. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading 0. I think that has to do with the fact that the key that I've defined right here is not marshaled. So I have to marshal this value. Okay, so I can't leave it as just team ID with the corresponding attribute value. I either have to marshal it myself, or I can use the library to do that for me. So I'm going to go ahead and I hit test. I didn't mean to test it. I knew that it wouldn't work. I was going to get the same result. I added this marshal function call around it, and I have to deploy it. Okay, so now my key is actually marshaled, meaning I have type attributes associated with the actual attribute value. And now if I test this, now you'll see I get the correct metadata, indicating that that was successful. And if I go over to my items, I had 38, now I should have 37. Okay, and you'll notice Robin Yount is here and Prince Fielder is not next to him. Okay, so I have 37 records after deleting the one record. Okay, if I want to configure my test event so that you can manually pass in a record, so instead of me hard coding the fact that I wanted to delete Prince Fielder, I'm going to go ahead and pass in the event. Okay, so whatever comes in the event, that's the key that I'm going to use for the delete, and I'm going to configure my test event so that this JSON object is passed to me. Okay, and I didn't do this in the past, but what happens if I try to delete a record that doesn't exist? Okay, so this record actually doesn't exist. Prince Fielder was already deleted, so the sort key of 1 doesn't exist anymore. So if I go ahead and save that, I want to see what my metadata actually looks like when I try to do that delete for a key that doesn't actually exist. Okay, so it attempted it, but I don't know if it's successful or not. The delete item command was successful, but you'll notice in my items it was 37. It's still going to be 37. I didn't actually delete a record. Okay, if I actually do want to delete a record, so I want to delete Robin Yount, then I'm going to configure my test event. So I want player with a number of 19. So I go ahead and save that. And now when I run this code, I'm taking that parameter that was passed in, this event argument that was passed in. Now it should actually delete a record. Okay, so now I get the OK status code. And now you'll notice that I have 36 records. Okay, so now my delete item command is actually deleting a record based on the key that was passed into me. Okay, and again, the key that gets passed into me is coming from my test event. Ultimately, this is going to come from a client application. So maybe I have a list of players, the user selects a player, and then based on that user selection, they want to delete that particular player. Then I have to then turn around and infer what is the team ID and what's the sort key, send those over to my Lambda function via this event argument, and then I can use that to then remove the record from DynamoDB. Okay, so this is just an example of Lambda code interacting with DynamoDB to delete a record.